Well, good evening. Welcome to Yada Yada Radio. We're pleasure to be with you this evening. Have Kirk helping out with us as well. Kirk, I have a question for you. Do you remember the rat?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, Pope Benedict, right? The rat.
Oh yeah.
He was Joseph Ratzinger. He was held the chief fraud position at the Roman Imperial Church from 1977 to 1982, and then he resigned. First pope to resign in, I think, about 600 years. And when he resigned, I was doing Shattering Myths, and I said, guess what, folks? This man is resigning because he's up to his eyeballs in priestly pedophilia. And it sounded like that might have been too stark a claim, but they had just come out with a red book that the Roman Catholic Church never released that had the detail of all of the priestly involvement and raping and molesting little children, of which there are millions worldwide. And he disappeared from sight because the fact is he was aiding and abetting many of the pedophiles. And so as I made that claim, guess what appeared in the news? Now, all of these years after that time, yes, indeed,
yeah,
he was involved in priestly pedophilia. That wasn't all that tough a call, however. You may have read during the week that there was a hostage situation in a Texas synagogue. The two things that are most interesting is that the rabbi at this synagogue was he is a ultra-liberal reformist rabbi. This is Judaism ultra-light. And he is best known for forming enduring friendships with Muslims, which is a religion born out of hatred for Jews, and that is the most belligerent religion in the world today against Jews. But no problem for this rabbi. Nope, he was Mr. Interfaith Counsel. He was a little bit miffed, though, when the FBI came out and said that this had nothing to do with Jews. It was simply about the release of Miss Al-Qaeda, or as they call her, Lady Al-Qaeda, Siddiqui. This is just the saddest thing. Here's a woman that gets every benefit in the world. She goes to American universities, ultimately gets a PhD from a Jewish college. So progressive Jews are among the most lost people on the planet. They're the extremes of Jewish life, from ultra-liberal progressives where evidence and reason no longer matters and completely lost their mind. And then you have the Haredim, who are still stuck back there with Baal Shem Tov in the 18th century and can't seem to get to their weasel hats straight. And the liberals at the Jewish University awarded her a PhD. And she did a really fine job of showing her gratitude for what they had done, because she went off and joined the Islamic State and the fundamentalist Muslims. She couldn't wait to go over to Afghanistan and kick some imperialist crusader behind. She, at one point, when she had acquired things from the internet that would be used to kill masses of people in suicide attacks, the U.S. military said, we are monitoring what you're ordering here, and just because you have an account with Amazon does not mean that we're going to let you blow us to smithereens. And she said, no problem. Grabbed one of the U.S. military weapons that the serviceman was carrying and tried to kill him. And so she was given a right fine sentence of some 88 years, and she's become the cause celeb of the Islamic world. Typical Muslim woman. She was sold by her parents as a toy for some man who, in typical Muslim fashion, beat the living crap out of her. And then her response to that was not to walk away from Islam, which she had every right to do in the West, but instead to marry into Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. But CARE, the Council of American Islamic Relations, is touting her release, saying that she is one of the great injustices in the history of the world. And she was the reason, allegedly, that the Muslim that traded the hostage situation had done so. He wanted this bastion of Islamic virtue released. The last thing I want to talk about in the news is something that we have discussed now for well over 2 years, since the onslaught of COVID. And I even wrote it into one of the chapters of Coming Home, I think one of the final chapters of Volume 2 of Coming Home. And I talked about in the initial months of lockdowns and deprivation of livelihoods along with liberty, how those that were not depriving people of livelihood and liberty, states, were actually faring better than those who, in fact, much better than those that were depriving people of life and liberty. And that ultimately, I said, our response to COVID-19 is going to be far worse than the disease. I also said that my analysis here of this disease in terms of its mortality is that its mortality rate is going to be much closer to the flu than anyone's willing to acknowledge. And then when the statistics finally came out that 96% of those that are listed as a COVID death had 2 or 3 morbidities that would have killed them within a very short period of time, and that were to the point of being deadly at the time that they were listed as a COVID death, or that had heart disease, diabetes, high blood pressure, whatever it might have been, the 2 to 3 on average morbidities in addition to COVID. But the death is attributed to COVID, to the point that obviously the COVID deaths were being overstated by between 8 and 9 times. Been proven now. Both the CDC and the British and the Freedom of Information Act have released the data, and they show that the average age of someone dying of allegedly COVID is 81 years old, which is the average age that a man dies prior to and without COVID, and that the deaths are overstated by 8 or 9 times, and that we've done everything wrong. The other thing that's quite interesting is now there's more of a complete analysis of the $5 or $6 trillion we have squandered in COVID incentives. Turns out that most of that money enriched fraudulent schemes and never did anything that had any value. And in the process, of course, we destroyed our currency. Now, I'm not saying that COVID isn't real. It is real, absolutely. And it is exceedingly contagious, particularly in Omicron variety, and it is a much worse disease than the flu. It was designed to be much worse, and it is much worse. I got Omicron. There was 5 days of absolute agony. And Omicron is far less destructive to one's life and body health than were Delta and the other variants. But nonetheless, we find ourselves in a position where most everyone is going to get Omicron, and it will either have enduring immunity, or we're going to be dealing with this forever. And even if it has more enduring immunity than the vaccines have had, And anybody that's not vaccinated, you are crazy in my book, because with Delta, we had a pandemic of the anti-vaxxers. With the vaccines, you're less likely to have serious symptoms, even though it does not protect you against getting Omicron. But Omicron is either going to have some staying power with immunity. We've been dealing with this thing for a long time, but the fact of the matter is, even the most liberal governors and prime ministers, at least outside of places like New Zealand and Australia, have finally come to realize that everything they did was counterproductive. And we made things worse in the way that we reacted. We destroyed supply lines. Inflation is raging again. Just go to the market and try to buy the things that you're accustomed to buying, and your bill will be more than 20% higher than it would have been.
More than that here.
Yeah, 6 or 7 months ago. So that's where we find ourselves, and every bit of this we predicted. I would like to welcome again, we have a bunch of new listeners from New York who are part of the social media outreach. We welcome you. We understand that one of our new listeners from New York, a Talmud-toting Jewish fellow, which means that he is among the rare people in the Haredim and Orthodox Judaism who approached us and said that these books are nothing but commentary. And I did not respond to him. The team that manages social media did that, but they nonetheless reported to me that general statement, and I know nothing more than that. But I do have some comments, and I know you do as well, Kirk.
Yes, sir.
It is pretty rich that in a religion where the rank and file in that religion are giving kosher phones, where they're specifically prevented from exploring anything on the internet. They can't even call a rape hotline to protest their rabbi raping them, or their husband or brothers raping them. They're secluded in an intellectual ghetto. And that there are still the most devout of the Haredim that troll the internet for the specific reason to try to discredit threats to their religion. Because they know that ultimately they can't control everybody 100% of the time, and anything that exposes the religion for the fraud that it is very threatening to them. And so they will try to demean it. And in this case, it is sort of a hoot that this individual would call the 25 volumes of Yada Yada 100% commentary. They are about 25% commentary, so it was only a 4 times exaggeration. But when you compare that to the Talmud, which is all commentary and not even accurate commentary, mostly arguments against the Torah.
Yahweh's word.
That is pretty rich. And I know, Kirk, just moments before the show, you took some notes, and before we get back to Zachariah, I want to give you a chance to share some of your thoughts. You've been invested in this for a long time, and I don't think there's anybody out there, maybe with the exception of Jackie and maybe JK and Mike, who are the fact checkers, and Molly as well, and the editors of these series, who have read every page of every book about 50 times, and now check every single word to validate whether or not it is properly presented, right to the accuracy of the transliterations. I don't think there's anybody else that has done as much checking to validate whether or not these translations are accurate or not, or whether or not the insights derived from them are accurate. Because I got to tell you right now, with the team that we have doing fact checking and editing, if I goof at all, oh my goodness,
They call you on it.
Oh boy, and it's wonderful. because the last thing you want to do is be wrong about God. That's a terrible position to be in. And we have been wrong. The fact of the matter is that I wouldn't have devoted the last 3 years of my life to rewriting every book, starting with the translations from scratch, if it wasn't for the fact that we've gotten a lot right, but some of the things we've gotten wrong, and some of the things we've gotten wrong are big things. It's like I was raised a Christian, and so I was so indoctrinated in this replacement theology nonsense, where I knew that the promises God made to Israel were never transferred to a Gentile church. But this Christian mindset that every time a promise is made to David, that it somehow applies to this mythical caricature known as Jesus Christ, that was tougher to relinquish, because you read every prophecy about Father and Son, about Messiah, about Savior, about a return, and you'd see it as, well, this must be talking about Yosha. And no. But it really takes a lot to finally come to the realization that there is a Son of God. His name is Dowd. There is a Messiah. His name is Dowd. There is a King of Kings. His name is Dowd. A branch. His name is Dowd. A shepherd. A chosen one. A firstborn. It's all Dowd. And it is Dowd that is returning with Yahweh. And that is so startling to most people, including Jews. In fact, Christianity as a religion, Kirk, would not exist today. The most menacing dogma towards Jews in human history would not have prevailed if the Jewish leaders at the time of Yosha had A, recognized and used his name, B, recognized that he was fulfilling Pesach Passover and that he was the Passover lamb, and C, that the Messiah is well known. It is
should be
Dowd who is the Messiah. The Son of God is well known. It's Dowd. And if they had said the Torah, prophets, and Psalms describe the life and times and the return of the Messiah and of the Son of God and the King of Kings, and it is Dowd, not this fellow. This fellow is the lamb. He is not the shepherd. And his name is Yosha. It means that Yahweh is saving. And so Yahweh is working through him to fulfill Pesach Passover. And, oh, by the way, the Passover lamb never comes back to life. That's counterproductive and utter nonsense. But you want a resurrection. That's going to happen. It's going to happen with David. If they had said any of those things, Christianity would have died in the wretched letters of Paul and never would have been resurrected. And so they are to blame for it. It is no small thing to recognize who the Messiah really is, who the Son of God is, who's the King of Kings, who's returning with Yahweh, when Yahweh is returning, which is Yom Kippurim in year 6000 Yah on our pagan Roman calendars. That's sunset 6:22 p.m., October 2nd, 2033. It's all laid out for us. And sometimes we have missed elements of it. And so anytime somebody can say, you got this wrong, or as the case might be, we learn more. You write another book and you learn more from that book. You go back and say, I think I better edit this and make it right. And so we're not claiming that we're infallible. We're claiming that we've made the best, most complete attempt to get it right of anybody in the past, thousands of years. All right, Kirk, what did you come up with? I know this was something that was meaningful to you with all the time you have spent fact-checking.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was two things. Because y'all were kind enough to share the emails with me. I didn't feel like jumping into someone else's email and responding, but I did start taking notes on how I was feeling about it all. And because we have a lot of new people, and we haven't done this for a long, long time, let's explain some of the things that you do in translating, even though all that's in the book. All they have to do is pick it up and read it. But I took... I kind of spent a couple of days writing down the defense of what we do, what you do in particular, and what I do, and people like me do, and what tools we use. And if you're going to complain about what we do, it's an open book test. Here's all the stuff that we use. This is how we use it. You may not agree with what we're saying, but you prove it. Nobody ever seems to write anything back and say, let me prove to you that you're wrong. They always say, oh, you're wrong. And I find that rather odd.
In terms of, it's interesting, in terms of the translations and yada yada, I've been doing this now for 20 years. Published 25 books. They average about 600 pages apiece, with that about 15,000 pages. And have now done probably 15 to 20,000 hours of radio where we've discussed it. And thus far, not a single person has said, you've mistranslated this. Not one. And we get a lot of correspondence. Not one. There's people have said, I don't understand how you got to this. Could you explain it to me? And I'll go back, because usually I'll explain it in the text. If there's a translation where there are many choices, what I'll do is I'll write a paragraph or two about, here are the other choices, and here's why I chose these over the others, and here's the root of the word. Here is the word stripped of its diacritical marks as it was originally written, and what it could potentially be, and here is the word's first use as to why I've chosen this definition. So usually I'm pretty thorough if a word isn't exceedingly clear. And there are some that, a great example would be Zeroah. If you, Zeroah turns out to be an exceedingly important term, both to negate the credibility of Judaism, but also to explain Yahweh's style, his purpose, his intent, his means of operation. And the first time that I translated Zeroah, I saw it consistently associated with the Passover lamb. And the reason for that is it's presented in the Torah. The Zeroah is equated with preparing the Passover lamb. So did my homework, used it in the translation. But after a while, there were times when Zeroah was used that it was not the Passover lamb. It either, in fact, there's one place where it calls Moshe a Zeroah, as he was a shepherd guiding the people, a nurturing shepherd as a guide. And there's places where David is called a Zeroah. Now, he's a very strong ram, a leader protecting the people. And then there's a place where there's a little Zeroah, which is associated with the Goyim, who is the last witness, presented through Yahshua. And so it necessitated a much more comprehensive evaluation of what Zeroah meant. And so we ended up writing chapters on its use and where it took us. And, one of the places it took us is that Zeroah is used to describe why God, and this is Solomon speaking at the dedication of the first temple, telling all Yisrael that somebody not speaking their language from a place far away, who is definitely not a Yisraelite, is going to produce books for them to read that they ought to pay attention to and respond accordingly. And Zeroah was used there, and it took us right there to read it and present it. So we've done a pretty good job. I'm interrupting your presentation.
No.
On translation,
this is all good.
I've really tried to be transparent. Put all the cards on top of the table and say, here are the options with this word. You're free to take a different approach, so long as you're consistent. But here's how I came to this rendering. And I don't think there's anybody else who's ever done a translation that way. To be completely transparent and vulnerable and say, here's the transliteration. I'm going to give it to you in the most generic form. You can look it up for yourself. You can also search it, and then you can think about the explanations, which is about 25% of these books. About 25% is the translation. About 25% is an explanation, a narrative on the translations, and to put a person in a position to validate everything. And about 25% unique insights and 25% commentary. And the commentary is on the passage we've just translated, and the insights, well, I think that's the thing that makes these books the most unique. And that is that the vast preponderance of the insights being shared haven't been written about, talked about, considered in over 2,500 years. And there's hundreds of them, if not thousands. Anyway, so yeah, I agree with you. I think the translations are transparent. If you want to disagree, you're welcome to do so, but prove it wrong. And there's another, just one last thing here, is that somebody might say, well, I read Hebrew, so I don't need to do a translation. And my response to that would be, well, most Jews don't. Our target audience is Jews. The language spoken by more Jews and read by more Jews than any other is not Hebrew, not Yiddish. It's English, and by a wide, wide margin. It's the most popular language in the world by a huge percentage, even over Mandarin Chinese. And so if you want to communicate with the most Jews and the most people, you've got to communicate in English. And then I would say also, if reading in Hebrew was working out so well for you, why don't you know God's name? How come you don't know how to celebrate Pesach, or Matzah, or Bakura, or Shabua, or Towrah, or Kippurah?
Or
Sukkah. You don't have a clue how to observe any one of the seven if reading it in the original language is working out so well for you. How come you're so clueless? How come you can't name any one of the 5 conditions of the covenant?
Yeah, the mitzvah.
Right. Why is Yahweh ranting about how disgusted he is with the Jewish religion, not only throughout the time of the prophets, but right up to the last days, if you got it right? How come you don't recognize Yosha as the Passover lamb? You're so smart. How come your Passover Seder plate is Keynesian? It's all vegetables. Why have you relegated the most important day of the year, matzah, to an ingredient? And if you're so smart, why have you got it all wrong? If you're so smart, why did Yahweh need to use a lowly goy to figure it out for you, to awaken you, call you back home?
Can't debate that. I'm sorry. I'm not in that debate. I fold my thing home and say, you're right. How do you do that? I mean, well, without being too redundant, I'll just mention that the first time I read Yahweh, Yada Yah, 13 years ago, 14 years ago. I have to check. It's been a long time. And I picked it up and I read about 50 pages of it, and I threw it down on the chair as I stood up. And I said to myself, damn, I know he's right. I know about 50% of the things you mentioned I knew were true. And I said, if he's right about the others and everything, my whole world just turned upside down. So I just kept reading, and both Terry and I read for a couple of years. But in particular, the next year, it took about 2 weeks to dispatch something I've had all my life, Christianity, and throw it away. And I didn't. It was hard to stop saying my Lord, my Lord, and Lordy, 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 and all that kind of stuff. And it was hard to not say, and it's hard to say not say Jesus, in God. I didn't know Yahweh's name either, although I had books on it. And I saw Yahweh, phonetically mispronouncing it, but at least using the Yahweh. But I didn't know, and not only that, I knew what a lexicon was. I didn't know there were so many varieties, and I didn't know that there was I didn't know what interlineary was. So all that, plus I couldn't turn on a computer if my life depended on it. So I've come a long way, baby.
Pretty analog guy, yeah.
Pretty much.
But you're an
pretty
artist.
Much I can draw a picture. Yeah, I draw a picture. They pay me a little bit now and then, and that's good. So, but what I wrote back to this was not to per se to write to this guy who was attacking the books. But to defend how we do it, so that you'll know how to do it, and then give it your best shot. And then the second thing was to defend you. I wrote quite a bit in this little paper about what I think about you, not to you to get a big head or anything, but also to kind of explain what it is. So if you don't mind, I'll feel free to jump in.
But just give you this introduction.
Sure.
I really don't care what anybody says about me. It's irrelevant to me. What is relevant to me is Yahweh's credibility and the credibility of our witness as we translate and present what Yahweh's prophets have said regarding His people. So that means a lot. Individually, I don't care. In fact, this whole exchange, I read nothing of it. So. But I think it is important for a new listener, particularly somebody who is questioning the various forms of Judaism and doesn't really know where this religion kind of materialized and why its claims are as they are, and why life has been so tough for Jews for the past 2,500 years, and why they remain God's chosen people. It's Yehudim and Yisrael. But how is it that Christianity has become so menacing, claiming that the first half of the book? And so it is important that we help those who are just beginning their journey away from religion and politics and have a keen interest in knowing who Yahweh is, that the slanderous attacks are without merit. That's important. And so to that extent, I think it's important for you to share what you're going to share. But one thing that's important to me is that this is not personalized. Mm-hmm. It has all to do with what you read and the validity of what you read and your ability to validate what you read, and how consistent what you read is with what Yahweh wants His people to know.
Mm-hmm. Well, with that, I'll say that I was writing back to this person with no intention to really send it to him, but just to put thoughts down. And I said to him, if anyone took a serious time to read these books, he or she would have discovered the greatest collection and the most accurate translations of the Torah in English in the world. The Hebrew words are listed and amplified, which is amazing. No one does that. I can't find it anywhere else. You introduce your readers to a rather large list of how to translate tools that they can use to verify for themselves the accuracy of the translations, most of which are free online. I found that, which is helpful. I have a lot of books, but I also have some stuff online that I use continuously. And I personally use a Dead Sea Scrolls Bible, which I find phenomenal. The whole idea of the Dead Sea Scrolls and how far back it dates, and the fact they found it in 1947, the year before Israel was formed a country again. Got about 12 lexicons that I use quite a lot of, and inland areas that, and some other related material. I've never, now speaking a little bit about the way your approach and what you've been doing, and I've been real close because I've been invited. You invited me to be on a lot of Shadow Mist shows that went on for a long time, 3, 4, 5 a week. No, it was 5 a week, going in 3 hours, some of them. But I've gotten to know you pretty well and visited you twice, and I've never known you to not return respectful email inquiries. I know you're very busy now, so don't flood him with emails. He's busy translating, and 10 hours a day is pretty hard work. I spent 2 days here in the chair, and I'm about to die.
It's about 10 hours a day in this chair. It is true, and it's been that for 6 and 7 days a week.
Work, I know.
Yes, and it's been that way for 20 years. So there has been no lack of effort. We will say that for sure. And this has not been. This is not like the rabbis. The rabbis are overpaid by a 4 to 5
third
times
party.
the average cleric. And so everything for them is a money-making scheme, and we charge nothing.
We charge zero.
The books are entirely free online. We don't take any ads. We don't do any donations, none. And even the printed books at Amazon are royalty-free. It's just the cost of printing and shipping that you're paying for. And you look at a 700-page book for $14, and you say, oh, okay, if that was a textbook at that size, that'd be $100 more dollars. But so we've certainly done our best to devote the time, the energy, the effort to get this right, and to charge nothing for it. And not only charge nothing for it, we take no donations for it. So. And I think that's the way Yahweh wants it. I'm quite certain that Yahweh does not want us to charge to convey his words. It's I don't think Moshe was paid, for example.
No. Well,
not comparing ourselves to Moshe here, mind you.
No.
I have the utmost respect for that man. It's a tremendous character and intellect, but he wasn't paid.
No. No, he had a gig. He had a gig and a wife and a whole pasture. He could have stayed, but he couldn't have. Yahweh wasn't going to let him. He's very convincing. But it was hard work for a man of his age. So anyway, I was just expressing that you're probably the most dedicated and hard-working person I've known, truly. And if anyone were to put just a little bit of that effort in, I will guarantee you the words are beyond your imagination. I know that because that's my story. I have never looked back from week 2 after I read the first chapter. It's been all about, wow, where's this going and how can I get there? In fact, when I finished yada yada, I actually was crying. I was just saying, gosh, it's over. There's no other book. Well, little did I know.
Little do you know. And I think the same thing is
twice, right there.
Yeah, the second, I think it's true that there's so much material, and Yahweh is so lovable and approachable, and the characters that he uses to communicate with are so interesting that if you give him a chance, he will win your heart. And so, if you are willing, particularly now with the rewritten Introduction to God, volumes 1 and 2, and I'm about a little over halfway through with volume 3 now in the rewrite. But if you read volume 1 and volume 2 of an Introduction to God, and I think the Covenant in the Family volume 3 really of Yada Yah 3, 4, 5, and 6, as you go from being in the family, part of the covenant, to the presentation of the 7 Moed Mikre through invitations, harvests, and appointments, you get that much through that material. I don't think it's possible for someone to read through those volumes and not fall in love with Yahweh.
No.
You're going to love Dode. You're going to love Moshe. You're going to love Shamuel and Zechariah. You're just and this Yahweh. You are absolutely going to respect and love and care about, and you'll engage in a relationship with. It just takes the will, the time, the will to invest the time to read to that point. And if you still have a foot in the Christian camp, for our Gentile listeners out there, then read Questioning Paul. There is not one chance in a billion that you could read the 4 volumes of Questioning Paul and remain a Christian. But we're not going to leave you high and dry. It's not like we're taking something valuable from you and providing nothing in its place. Yeah, we're exposing a complete and utter fraud that is robbing you of your soul, and in the process sharing with you a way to come to know and approach Yahweh and participate in his covenant. And so we're taking something that is rotten and has no value and replacing it with the most valuable commodity in the universe, a relationship with Yahweh. So it's just a matter of time. If you're willing to invest the time, you'll know the truth. And it is liberating, it's empowering, it's enriching. There's nothing that God asks of us that isn't pleasurable and beneficial.
With this association I've formed with you and Yahweh's family that I've gotten to know quite a few of and enjoy immensely, I was introduced to the ancient Hebrew thought and how the Hebrew language is seen and understood through the 5 senses. I thought how fascinating to be able to explore. Number one, the best advantage was, well, let me say the first thing about it that was exciting, because I'm an artist and I think symbolically a lot, and I think like shapes and I like symbols and all that sort of thing. And it was just like it opened up a whole nother world. And the fact that all those letters actually have a whole lot of meanings, and the way they're arranged has a whole lot of meaning and so forth, it was like, oh, wow, how cool. But the best part about it is, and this is the original language, that the original alphabet that Yahweh wrote the Towrah in, I'm sure is the one that Moshe used. But it also confirms, you find out the more you study those and what they mean, and collectively the way they're arranged in that particular word, in that particular subject, in that context of that thing, like in Zechariah. I thought, wow, that confirms translations. So it's another layer besides just, so I thought, wow, that's something worth pursuing, and I've been doing it ever since. And then the fact that to understand that this concrete language has to be understood in that context. It's not like a Western philosophical language, so you have to get that kind of out of your brain as well when you're translating, or just to be thinking in terms of it has to be understood. A word is understood by a group of people that they were written to that are tied to the earth. It's their 5 senses.
Yeah, a very real presentation, visual. You didn't even have to be literate to be able to understand what was written.
You can see the picture.
Because the pictures would lead you there. Take Yahweh's name. You see God as Father, exactly. Arm reaching down and out with an open hand as a father would reach out to a child. And then you see 2 people standing up, looking up, reaching up to him on either side of the wah, which was the tent peg, which would secure and enlarge a home. The 2 people are obviously Abraham and Sarah. And the home is the covenant that is being secured and enlarged by reaching up to and grasping Yahweh's outstretched hand. That's his name.
Yeah.
And every word is like that. I mean, Bereth, for covenant is based on Be'eth, which starts with the Beth, which means home and family.
Mm-hmm.
This is not complicated. El, God, it's a ram's head, which is a male lamb living with the sheep, living as part of the flock, protecting and guiding the sheep. And with El, it's the ram, the leading and protective ram, is also acting as
staff,
a shepherd, because that's the shepherd's staff, which was used to walk with and guide and protect the sheep. And then you take Ab, Father, the first word in Hebrew lexicons. It's God's favorite title. It's the ram living with the flock, protecting the flock, leading the flock, and home. Be'eth, together. Father of the home. Leader of the home. The graphic nature of the language is exceedingly revealing.
He's my kind of guy.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've had the pleasure of doing is retranslating the 119th Mizmor. And for our listeners, the 119th Mizmor is something that I translated about 10 to 12 years ago for the first time, and haven't translated it since. So this is a completely new translation after 10 years. And the reason I bring it up is that the 109th Mizmor is arranged so that there's 8 statements devoted to each letter in the Hebrew alphabet in alphabetical order. So it begins with the Aleph, and there's 8 statements that the first letter of the first word in those statements is an Aleph, and then the Be'eth, and then the bastard child of Hebrew letters. There are 8 statements related to the Gimel. So it goes all the way through, and then each segment helps explain the nature of that letter and how that letter helps us better understand the Torah. What I didn't know, Kirk, is that I'm now, I think, on the 20th letter. No, not the 20th letter, 16th letter, I guess. I've got 6 to go. The Pei is the letter that I'm just now starting, which is the open mouth, and so I'm getting to what will be 3 very controversial letters in Hebrew. The Tazdeh is very controversial, wonderful things and terrible things with that letter. The Kof, the horizon, can be good or bad. The setting or the rising of the sun, the end of an era or the starting of a new day, for example, with that letter. But I just came out of the letters that were witness, I, Ain, and Nun, sun, as well as Shemek, which is the sign. And what I didn't realize that when I translated the thing 10 years ago is that there are really 3 themes that run through the 119th Psalm. I had thought that originally that it was the 4 key words, chok, bakudim, mitzvah, and misvat, over and over again being presented from the perspective of each letter. And that's there, to be sure. But there's also a very strong undercurrent of Dode, who's the author of the 119th Psalm, lashing out at those who deprived him of what Yahweh had promised. It's over and over again. God made these promises to me. This is what he wants to see fulfilled through me. This is how he's going to use me when I return, literally when I'm resurrected and I come back to life during Yom Kippurim. And so it's very, very prophetic of Dode serving in the role of the Messiah who returns with Yahweh here in our, what is immediate future, while also being a referendum against religion. He is constantly condemning the religion in Israel in the years preceding his return, which would be, of course, Judaism. So it's all three of those things put together. It's not just a song to the Torah, to understand the Torah, but also to understand how Judaism, in particular, has corrupted the Torah's message and misappropriated it, as well as how Christianity has done so, and then how Dowd is going to resolve that problem in his return.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot more to it than just a romp through the letters, if you will.
When do you think we'll be able to take a look at that?
Well, as I say, I'm 16 letters through.
I know you've been sick.
Yeah, and maybe this is one of the things when it's finished with the fact checkers and the editors that we'll get David to post before the book is done, if he has the chance to do so. But I understand he has a house full of COVIDers too. He got it permeated his household not long after it permeated mine here. So you're the last of you and Jackie, I think, are the last of them not to get it. Anyway, you have more that you wanted to say on the defense of Yada Yah, or should we?
Let me.
Okay.
Let me share one other thing, because we live in a world. I was going to talk about the grammar, but the grammar is a little bit dry. But regardless, the grammar, you'll be amazed when you get the perfect and the imperfect. That's like opens a door, to translating too. It's just all those things in the verbal.
Well, one of the great things about the grammar is that's the thing that made the biggest difference in the retranslation of the 119th. Almost every initial statement, the 119th, begins in the voice second person, a verb scribed in second person, but usually in the imperative. So the imperative is a second person expression of volition. And then it transitions from the imperative in second person. So it's you want, you decide, you choose, your desire, your will is to X, Y, Z. And it's always the only person speaking is Dowd, and the only person being spoken to is Yahweh. So most of these statements are, it is your will. It is your choice.
Yes.
You have decided. This is what you want to do. You want to teach me. You want to use me. You want to revive me.
Understood.
And then it's Dowd making an expression in the cohortative. And the cohortative is a first-person expression of volition, where Dowd speaks in first person. Under the cohortative says, you want to do this because I want to do that. Now, you want to prepare me so I can serve as the Savior. You want to teach me so that I can teach others, because that's what I want to do. So the whole thing is this celebration of free will and volition that doesn't appear in any translation. It's like these three profound volitional moods, the imperative, the cohortative, and the jussive, third person to be jussive. It's like they don't even exist. Pay no attention to them in translations, and yet it's everything. Somebody says, I want to do God's will. Well, he tells you what his will is. What do you think? A statement and second person is, when the person being spoken of is God, and it's written in the imperative, that's God's will. And he doesn't want anything for Dowd that he doesn't want for us.
Yeah, that's quite a
so it is a treasure. I think one of the greatest treasures of Hebrew grammar is that it is akin to light. On a photon of light, time is. All time exists simultaneously, which means if you were a being comprised of energy or light, a spiritual being, you could see the past, the present, and the future as at any time or all at the same time. And so it explains how Yahweh described prophetic events, committed them to writing hundreds, if not thousands of years before things occurred. he wasn't predicting the future. He was
Reporting.
reporting the future. He was telling you, this is what I have witnessed in your future. This is where your choices take you. And reporting it back in our path. And he could do that because as a spiritual being akin to light, he can maneuver in time. Hebrew verbs are written that way. There is no past, present, or future tense in the original Paleo-Hebrew. And so all verbs are true throughout all time. They're liberated in time like light. And when you gain an appreciation of that, it opens up the floodgates of understanding, because that is what Yahweh was offering us. It all of a sudden now you understand, why is the universe so big if we can't even get past the moon? Much less explore this solar system, much less go to the nearest star, much less any part of our galaxy, much less go to another galaxy. What's the purpose of all of that? Well, when we're transitioned from three-dimensional physical beings stuck in time and held on this planet to being energy-based, beings liberated in 7 dimensions, we can go from here to there in the blink of an eye. Distance is no longer even a factor when time is something you can maneuver in. And it explains how a being goes from mortal to immortal, because energy always exists. It does not disappear.
To that point, it always occurs to me that how can you be critical of Yahweh not being, of Moshe not being told how this is happening by Yahweh, and know that there's a God, when how in the heck would this guy with his credentials, which are shepherd at 80 years old, shows up, besides all the miracles that you see and stuff, forget those for a second and just think about when he writes down the story of Noah in the Towrah, and he writes down, and we discover later that those dimensions for that ship keep it from turning over, and that they use today in these mega land aircraft carriers. Or he talks about something in the past where archaeologists have picked up that stuff and able to dig through and say, wow, that really happened. How would
Burkle impact crater showing that the story that Moshe said that a deep upwelling of seawater is going to precipitate the flood, and then we find the Burkle impact crater off of the Indian between the Indian coast and the mouth of the Tigris-Euphrates River, and we find that it hit 5,000 years ago, coinciding with the timing of the flood, and that we find a 12 to 20 foot sediment, evidence of sediment that is 12 to 20 feet deep, all the way up through Mesopotamia, and at the same time, we find that the Black Sea rose 500 feet and transitioned from fresh to salt water at exactly the same time, and that a flood of biblical proportions occurred at that time in that region in the way that it was predicted. All you have to do is search the actual Hebrew and then open your eyes. And there's a lot of things that are pretty monumental. You speak of light and verbs and time. When you study the cosmic radiation background from the Big Bang, you realize that its wavelength has been stretched to 10 to the 12th power, which means that we know that time flows at a different rate relative to the observer, and that it slows in the presence of great energy or great mass or great velocity. And so there has never been more energy or velocity or mass than at the Big Bang, which is a term that Yahweh himself coined.
Yes.
And we know that time, from the perspective at somebody at creation, which would have been God, was slowed by 10 to the 12th power. So what the Creator would have witnessed is 10 to the 12th less in terms of the duration of time, the passing of time, than we would experience looking back from our perspective here on puny old Earth. That's Einstein's theory of relativity. And so if you take the 14 billion years since the Big Bang, divided by 10 to the 12th power, you get 6 24-hour days. Exactly what God says. It's not that you have to wonder, was the universe created in 6 days, or is it 14 billion years old? The answer is both. If you were at creation, it took 6 24-hour days. If you're looking back from our planet, which, by the way, didn't exist for about 9 billion of those years, then it's 14 billion years.
Takes a little longer.
Yes, it takes a little longer. Actually, it takes the exact same amount of time. It just seems different.
Everything's relative. Somebody I know smart said.
Yeah, somebody really smart said that.
Listen, let me talk about my friend Yada for a minute, because we're in a dummy down world, and when someone attacks or disparages this work and that you put so much into, and you couldn't do this without critical thinking. Something that people just don't do anymore. I can give a lot of examples of stuff, but I won't. But so I said in here, my friend Yada is a critical thinker. That means he uses 7 criteria, and I put in parentheses, who'd have thought of 7, huh? To mean that he uses 7. He uses those 7 criteria to approach this somewhat daunting task. He uses analysis, interpretation, inference, explanation, self-regulation, open-mindedness, something that's very hard to find these days, and problem-solving. And then I addressed the point that there's a process to this, and I said the first is to pinpoint the issue. So the first thing you had to do, and the first thing we all had to do is in our head is to, all the translations are filled with falsehoods, lies, errors, omissions, and they're untenable. So historically, it's easy to prove that they were written to allow the powerful to control the masses, and now, of course, they exist to confuse, babble, to justify church and state, and people buy it because they don't think about it. They don't know it. They don't even know to go look to the issue, where the issue really is. But you did, and that's what launched this thing, because you said, well, wait a minute, in your conversations with the religious leaders that you knew. And then second, I said, you collect the information. So one's got to examine the oldest, most reputable sources and use the best tools that enable one to examine and scrutinize the evidence. In fact, that's actually a line in what Yahweh was doing to his children in verse 13:9 that we will get to. One should take great care in deciding what is relevant. Now, the reason I agree that should be in here for this work is because you've had to choose. We're on a short time period, and you've had to choose what is most important. And when you started out, you didn't say, okay, we're going to start. And remember, people used to ask you all the time, they say, why don't you start at Genesis and work your way through it? Well, easy for you, pal. But because I wanted to know, what does he want? What does he want from me? What can I do to be close to him? What's the criteria, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to make those discretionary choices at some point and say, okay, this is the most vital message to get across to begin with, and then you work out from there in whatever time is available.
Yeah, and there are certain themes, there are certain parts of the story that you have to know to gain an appreciation of Yahweh. You have to know how he and why he created the universe and conceived life. So you've got to cover the creation account. It is absolutely essential you understand what occurred in Eden and why the Gan Eden is God's idea of the perfect conclusion to a relationship. Yeah. And what environment that he created there, anti-religious, anti-political, that environment was just one-on-one in a relationship. But also what went wrong in the garden is important to know. And then what were the issues that caused that to go wrong, and how can it be made right? And then this appreciation for the fact that the timeline that Yahweh has laid out, everything is 7,000 years from the it's all 6 plus 1, so it's 6,000 years from the time that Adam and Chava were expelled from the garden. We're going to return to it, and then we're going to spend that last 1,000 years, the celebration of Sukkah, in the garden-like conditions, camping out with Yahweh. So you need to understand the garden. You really do need to understand the flood, because it has to be demystified so that you understand this is a real story. It happened in this place. It occurred for this reason. This is why Noah was chosen. And what transpired as God was giving him instructions. And then from there, it's important to understand the stories of Babel and confusion and what God has against Babylon, intermixing that leads to people being confounded and confused. That's another essential element of the story. Then the most important part of the story is the covenant. And so that's one that we've written 3 entire volumes just on the covenant. So the covenant is really important. What are the things that Yahweh asked of Abraham? And what did he offer Abraham? Because the most essential thing for us to know, once we come to know who Yahweh is, and we decide that we like him and we respect him, is what is he offering and what does he expect in return? And you learn the 5 conditions and the 5 benefits of the covenant. That's essential. Now, you don't have to know every aspect of what happened with Joseph and Mitzrayim, but you darn well better pick up the story with Moshe again, because Moshe, he is either the most important person in God's story or the second most. Now, the only person that would be in his league is Dod. They are the 2 mighty Zeroah. But it's really important to pick up the story of what was it that caused Moshe, who had it licked. I mean, he was in the Pharaoh's household, and yet he went out as Pharaoh's taskmasters were beating up Hebrews and risked his life to save them. That kind of courage is so rare. That character is so rare. It's important to know that. But then it's also important to know why he left Egypt. He didn't leave Egypt because he was afraid that the Egyptians were going to find out that he did. He left Egypt because the people he had fought to save, that he risked his life to save, turned on him.
Threw him under the bus. Yeah, threw him under the bus.
The Hebrews attacked him. And he said, this isn't so good. I got to get out of here. I risked everything to protect them, and now they're mocking me and demeaning me. Tells you a lot about the nature of Hebrew mindset. God loves these people, but I want to tell you, they're an acquired taste. So that part of the story is essential. It's essential to know how Yahweh introduced himself to Moshe. That part of the story, you got to tell you need to understand it in great detail. And how he introduced his name to Moshe, and why he chose Moshe, who was the only person on the planet that could do the job he wanted done, and even why he chose to work through somebody. Why God didn't go and bust his people out of Mitzrayim, the crucibles of religious and political oppression. Why he didn't go bust them out by himself. Why did he choose to go in there with a stuttering, broken down, 80-year-old shepherd on the lamb? Why that guy? Why any guy?
Yeah.
If you don't
he's going to work with somebody.
You are not going to understand the story. So that part is essential. And the next part that's essential is what precipitated the first Pesach. And what was the purpose of Pesach? Life. That's the purpose. It opens up the doorway of life through the sacrifice of the Passover lamb. And then what does matzah represent? As they were leaving this horrible place of religious and political, conspiratorial and militaristic persecution. So it's the removal of those things from our soul is what matzah represents. This fungus of yeast being taken from. That's an essential part of the story. And that once you become immortal based upon Pesach and perfected on matzah, you're ready to be adopted on Pekorim into Yahweh's family. It means firstborn children. That's essential. And it's essential to recognize that Shavuot was celebrated with the revelation of the Torah on Mount Choreb, and what even Mount Choreb represents. These things, this part of the story is essential. And then it's essential to know, what did Yahweh tell us about his Torah? How do we know what Yahweh inspired, what he did not inspire? What did Moshe convey to us? That's essential. If you don't know that, you are not going to know enough to develop a relationship with Yahweh. Now, from that point, so long as you have a little bit of an understanding of who Yosha was and the role that Yosha played as they entered the Promised Land, you can move forward. Because listen, there's not enough time for any one person or team of people to write about everything that Yahweh revealed. There's just too much material. So you do have to pick what is essential to know. And what I jumped to is the single most important life, the most interesting man who ever lived. The story of the Son of God, the story of the Messiah, the story of God's chosen, God's shepherd, God's king. This fellow's name is Dod. It means beloved. And so you pick up that story with Yahweh consoling Samuel. He listens to God. Where Samuel was distraught because he said, the people have rejected me and your instructions through me, and they want a king like all these other countries, and they want Saul.
Yeah, they want to be goys.
And Yahweh then delineates, here are the 12 disastrous things that are going to result from them choosing a government like the Goy. This is what's going to befall them, and everything is true. And then Yahweh says, they're not rejecting you, Samuel, they're rejecting me. And then from there, we have Yahweh explaining to Samuel, I want you to go anoint, find this person that's going to be my choice. And he says, my criterion for evaluating people is entirely different than man's. And we come to understand why God picked this 8-year-old boy named Dod, who was already estranged from his father down in Bethlehem, tending sheep on his own, and then anointed him the Messiah in their first meeting, placed his spirit upon him, told us that his criterion, again, for evaluating people was different than ours. And within a year, he's verbally accosting the uncircumcised and uncouth Philistine, Goliath, and brings him down with a single stone. He's 8 years old.
Phenomenal. Wow.
And this guy goes and he writes the majority of the Mizmor, Psalms, and I think all of the Mashal Proverbs. And God says more about him than he does everybody else. He is mentioned far more than even Moshe. The only name that appears more often than Dod's is Yahweh's.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you want to tell the story, you need to know about Dod. He is the embodiment of what God loves most. tells you what he's looking for in terms of people. And then from there, it's essential to go through the prophets so that we not only understand how Pesach, Matzah, Bakurim, and Shavuot were fulfilled in year 4000 Yah, and then how each of these Moed Mikre through Kara play out in our lives, which is an essential element of God's story, as essential as the covenant. That's why there's 3 volumes on them too. But then we need to know what God says is going to occur. And so we have written an enormous amount about what God said was going to occur and how that was going to, how we should be prepared for it, because it is a very different future than the religious are claiming, and we're living it. And I began today's program talking about what we predicted about the Ratzinger, Benedict, and it turned out to be exactly true. And then what I said about COVID, within a month of us even knowing about the virus, turned out to be true. Why did it turn out to be true? I'm not a prophet. But having been guided by Yahweh's prophets, it's very easy to understand exactly where we are and where we're going. Well, perspective, your understanding, your comprehension are taken to an entirely different level.
Well, that's your critical thinking again. There was 2 other points, and then I will stop interrupting. But one has to understand one's abilities and shortcomings to do, and in order to do one's best. Now we rely on Yahweh and trust in Yahweh, but it's nice to know what your shortcomings are, and you understand what you're really good at, and you understand what you're not good at, and as most of us do. But that's you're a little self-deprecating sometimes. I think you're top notch, man. But that's okay. It keeps you humble, but at least you don't run around telling everybody I know it all. You're not a jerk, like these people that you run across all the time. You don't you don't have all the answers, and you're willing. And the fact that you went and changed so many things when introduced with a new fact that changes a whole host of things, I mean, that's remarkable. Most people would have folded up the book and left down. But I commend you for that.
At one time I had thought that I didn't want to go back and rewrite everything because I'd done 6, 7 edit passes previously, and the edit passes are usually not a lot of fun. But translating the next new statement and then going where those words leads, now that's an adventure. That's really fun. So, I really wanted to write volume 3 of Coming Home as we were making our way through the Mizmor Psalms. And I really wanted to write volume 6 of Observations and continue to address what was being revealed through Yeshayah. But what I found is that it wasn't a sacrifice at all to set aside the new for a while and go back to the old. Because within the old, there were so many profound insights that I'd missed. That it was like going off on a new adventure, and the affirmations that you find on, wow, how much we have learned, how much we've grown, how much more we're able to do and see and communicate. It's actually turned out to be a marvelous experience. It wasn't a sacrifice at all, but this great gift.
Yeah. Well, the one thing I would conclude with on this is that your conclusions and the commentary found in the volumes are based on reason and evidence. You mean you really provide like all the stuff you were just doing on the Merkel crater and all that sort of thing. I mean, that's stuff you can Google these days. You can say, "My God, that's really what it is." You can find the spots where these things are located, like Mount Moriah, Mount Horeb. You can, but you have to reason it out, which people just don't seem to have the skill to do anymore. But that's a shame. But so if you're going to look at these volumes and make a critique, you better come with both guns loaded, because you just, these are the criteria that you've gone by. These are the criteria that we've all tried to do. And even though this is a very minor thing, but I will agree with you so much in what you just said. This is minor on my point, on my education, is even playing with the little letters. I almost can tell you, like even in the verse that we were about to go to, the 13:9, those when you break those letters down, I now can see them actually defining they're actually in the context of what's being said. I didn't notice that before. I used to say, okay, this is what this means, this is what this means. But I mean, I'm not always sure that this is Yahweh in this one or Dod on some of the words, because of the Aleph can be either. And I would have never thought that. But he is the authority, the king, and so forth. So, yeah. But it's just little things that are just like, freak me out.
Well, look at Dod's name.
The increase with two doors leading in.
Yes.
Wow.
Right.
Pretty impressive.
Coming and going. This is this is
or
the
Goy
guy.
or Yehudim too. I like to think.
Yeah. So we are at
Zechariah 13:9. One of the insights on Zechariah 13:9 is the entire prophecy, the entire book, is on a singular subject. Well, I have said that the single most important day of the year for us, for Israel, for Yehudim, and for Goyim, who have chosen to be part of the covenant, the single most important day for us is Chag Matzah. That's the day that religious Jews have depreciated to a missing ingredient. They don't celebrate Chag Matzah anymore. They misappropriate Pesach and throw a bunch of vegetables on the plate and an inedible bone. Matzah is just simply an ingredient that is missing, as opposed to matzah is the centerpiece of the first three Moed Mikra. That while that is the most important day of the year for us, the Chag Matzah, which is a collectively Pesach, Matzah, and Bikurim leading to Shabuah, that is not the most important day for Yahweh. I'm going to tell you, for Yahweh, Pesach was no fun, because it was his soul that endured the sacrifice of the Pesach lamb, and that on Matzah it was his soul that was dispatched to Sheol to purge us of our religious and political corruption. Pesach and Matzah are no fun for Yahweh. The day that's fun for Yahweh is Kippurim. Everything in the universe, since it was created, is all pointing towards Kippurim and this transition from Kippurim to Sukkah and camping out with God. Kippurim is the day of reconciliations. It is not it's not a fast, and it is not a day of affliction, but a day of great celebration, and is the single most important day in the history of time for Yahweh. The entirety of the book of Zechariah, which means to remember Yah, Zakar, Yah, is devoted entirely to this day, including when Zechariah talks about the two witnesses. One, of course, is Elia, and the other witness is spoken of in great detail in that witness's relationship to the branch of the olive, as well as to an understanding of the menorah. And of course, the menorah is not that stupid religious menorah with the 9 candles that is concocted out of a civil war between Jews, but instead the real menorah of 7 lights that explain Yahweh's means to resolve our differences through the Moed Mikra, of which there are 7. I explained the 7 dimensions that exist between us and Shamaim, explaining the 7,000 years from the Big Bang to the end of the millennial Shabbat. All of that in 7. But it begins with that. It goes then through a long discussion of what Yosha, the high priest, represents. And this is not Yosha, the Passover lamb, but Yosha, who was a very corrupt individual, as a high priest, came back with the children of Israel from Babylon to rebuild the temple, because Yom Kippurim requires some very specific things to happen, and it's the high priest that is responsible for doing them on the Kipporeth, which is the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant. And for that, we have to go back and look what the Torah says about Aaron and why Aaron had to deal with the bull for himself, and then the scapegoat and the blood of the goat on the mercy seat to reconcile the relationship between Yahweh and his people. And then the Zechariah presents Dod, fulfilling the role of the high priest upon his return. Dod will wear very many hats. He's the King of Kings. He is the returning Messiah. He is the Son of God. He is the shepherd. He is the branch from which all things grow. And he is going to also be dressed in the role of high priest, which is so interesting because Yahweh said, you're not going to build my home because there is blood on your hands. It is having blood on one's hands that enables the high priest to enable the fulfillment of Kippurim, which God will fulfill correctly, consistent with his Torah. And so from that point, then we turn to this day, which is Yom Kippurim in year 6000 Yah. As I said, it commences 6:22 p.m., sunset in Jerusalem, October 2nd, 2033, when year 6000 Yah, Yom Kippurim is associated with our more pagan calendar. That is when Dod's going to return with the Yahweh, and this whole book then goes to that day. Now, those of you who are listening on the phone will continue to hear the program. We're going to go through a couple of statements, and then we'll resume at this time next week. So those that are listening online and through the chat room on their computers, this will appear in the archives, and we'd encourage you to do as about 99% of our listeners do and listen to the archives. But those, again, on the phone will hear us for the next 15 minutes as we talk about these two statements. Here is Zechariah 13:9. Yahweh is speaking. He says, I will come to, and I will be included among this one. The 1/3 that he's talking about that Yahweh is going to come to and be included among is the remnant of Israel. 2/3 of Israelites, of Yehudim, of Jews, are going to die between now and 2033. And while that is indeed a travesty that so many of the chosen people will die, Goyim aren't going to fare that well. A much higher percentage of Goyim are going to succumb over this period than Jews. And it is not God that is taking anyone's life at this point, although God will, upon his return, going to rid the world of all traces of religion and politics and of conspiracy. But it is man's egregious
destroying
action.
Man.
Destroying humankind. In the fire, I will purge and refine, perfecting them. We have talked about the fact that things that are useful that Yahweh uses as metaphor are all crushed before they're usable. The olive is crushed to make olive oil. The grape is crushed to make wine. The kernel of barley or grain is crushed to make bread. These souls are going to be purged and refined, being perfected in this fire. And fire is even interesting here, too, as is refining, because the last time that the children of Israel were refined was in Mitzrayim, which means the crucibles of oppression. He says, I'm going to refine them as one refines silver and test them as one assesses the authenticity of gold. And by the way, God testing us is a common theme. He tested Abraham at the end of them developing the covenant relationship. He says, before we consummate this, there's a test. And we deal with that test several times in the Yada Yah series as to specifically what Yahweh is testing. And fortunately for us, it's an open book test. We have no excuse. They will individually offer a summons and a welcome, calling out in my personal and proper name, and I myself will answer them. So there will be no Haredim, because they write a lot of names. A lot of rabbis get credit for a lot of arguments. But guess what? Yahweh's name is never mentioned, ever. So these people who are calling out individually, offering a summons, it's Hu Kara Ba. Kara is the basis of the Hebrew title Mikra, or in the plural Mikre, speaking of the invitations to meet with God. They will individually, because we do not come to God as a group. We do not come by part of a religion or part of a political party. We come to God individually, even when we are, I said we because I'm Goyim, but even as a member of Yehuda or Yisrael, you still come to God individually. The path to God is single file. They will individually offer a summons and a welcome. And this day, Kara, is the Mikra of Kippur. In my personal and proper name. And I myself will answer them. Yahweh is returning. His people are going to call out to him by name. They're going to welcome him into their lives. And I will say, each one is my family. And he or she will individually say, Yahweh is my God. That cannot be done in Israel today. Can't be done in any religious Jewish community. Can't be done in any Christian community. Can't be done in a Muslim community. Can't be done amongst the progressives. None of them are going to greet Yahweh by name. None of them recognize that Yahweh's entire intent in creating the universe was to form a covenant family and to enjoy the experience of raising children and working with one's family. This is the essence of what God created the universe to accomplish. It is where we are headed if you wish to be part of the covenant. And it's God, he said, God himself has said, I will say, each one is my family. It means that we are the sons and daughters of God. Pretty good position to be. You can't be in a better family.
No, I think not.
And he or she will individually say, Yahweh is my God. You're going to have to know how to pronounce the name, aren't you, to be able to say that? You're not going to say, the four letters are my God. Yahweh is my God. And this, by the way, for those who are listening for the first time, this is not difficult. What is the single most repeated word among Jews? Has been now for thousands of years. How do Jews greet each other? Shalom.
Yeah, hello, shalom.
The O sound in shalom, where does it come from?
It's the wa.
It's the Hebrew wa. It's a vowel.
Yes.
Towrah. Towrah is a pretty common word, right?
Pretty common.
All right. The O sound in Torah, what does it come from? The Hebrew wa, right? And the ah sound at the end of the Torah is from the hey. They're both words. Yes. This is not difficult. And no one questions how to pronounce the yod, the Y. It's pronounced exactly as it is in English. It's a consonant vowel. Therefore, the ah, we know. The O, we know. The
hey, we know.
Yod, we know. And in fact, God, when he introduced himself, he said, I am who I am. It was Haya, which means to exist. I exist. Haya. Yah. Yahweh. Not difficult and essential. Everyone is going to say, Yahweh is my God. Everyone is going to call out in Yahweh's personal and proper name. You got to know it. It is essential. Why do these 25 volumes all have a single name at the top of it? Yada, which means to know, Yahweh. Everyone was written under that title. Yada, to know, Yahweh. It is the single most important thing that a Yisraelite, that a Yehudem, Jew, Yehud, Jew, singular, or Goyim that wishes to be part of the covenant can know. Yada, Yahweh, to know Yahweh, to be familiar with, to recognize, to acknowledge Yahweh. Now that's a very profound prophecy. And this is all occurring on the day of reconciliations in year 6000 Yah, which is October 2nd, 2033, not very far away from now. Behold, a day of return is coming to approach Yahweh. And then that which is good and valuable will be apportioned and assigned to you in your midst. Zechariah 14:1. Why is it that in the 13 principles of Judaism, we don't find a single principle that says Yahweh is God's name? Why don't we find a single principle that says Yahweh wants to establish a covenant family? Why don't we find a single principle that says Yahweh is returning? Why do we have a principle that says an unnamed, unknown Messiah is going to show up when he is known, and he's, by the way, accompanying Yahweh? Why do Jews, religious Jews, respect Maimonides when he got everything wrong? Or why would you start a religion and call the father of your religion Akiba when Akiba had a false Messiah, and based upon his promotion of the false Messiah, had Yehudah pummeled, renamed as Philistina, and began the diaspora? And that's your founding father? And he got everything wrong? He should be your great adversary. Day is coming. A day of the return of Yahweh, to approach Yahweh, and then that which is good and valuable will be apportioned and assigned. What's the single most valuable thing you could receive? Well, the single most valuable thing you could receive is the Torah. Not that stinking argumentative book that was written in Babylon, that's the Talmud. No, the real Torah. God's teaching means teaching, guidance, direction, instruction. We are going to be so empowered, so enlightened, so enriched, we are going to need to know how to maneuver, how to act, what we should and shouldn't do as we express free will in eternity and in 6 and 7 dimensions. Because, well, what if black holes are a bad thing to approach? You think that maybe God's instructions would say, don't go near one of those things. You don't want to do that. You know, if you want to do something that's really fun and conceive life, you know, here's the DNA code, here's how it works, but you be careful and do it this way, but not that way. And if you do it, for God's sake, don't do what I have been falsely accused of doing. What did God get falsely accused of doing? Every religion would have man either afraid of God or worshiping God.
Yeah.
A superior being that would create an inferior being to be afraid of him or to worship him is sadistic.
True.
And so God would say, I didn't do that, although I've been accused of it. You ought not do that. That is not going to turn out well for you. That would be a sign of you really don't belong here. But if you're going to treasure life as I have, you're going to enjoy the conception of life as I have. You're going to share life as I have. Here's some instructions as to how to do it. That's why in Yirmiyah, in the 31st chapter, as Yahweh says, I'm going to renew and reaffirm my covenant. He says, I'm going to do it with Yisrael and Yehudah, not some God-forsaken church, but I'm going to do it with Yisrael and Yehudah. And he says it's going to be different than the covenant I established with Abraham. And so, it must be a new covenant. No, it's not a new covenant. There is something different. And he explains what's different. All you have to do is read the next line. What's different is he says, I'm going to place my Torah teaching right inside of you, becoming the part of the fabric of your life so that it can guide you in eternity so you get the most out of it. That's the gift he's giving. I'm going to give you my Torah teaching, my guidance, my instructions, so that you can enjoy yourself over eternity. And what else is he giving? Well, the benefits of the covenant. Yeah. Eternal life, perfection, adoption into his family, enrichment, empowerment. Those are the 5 benefits of the covenant. They are being offered too. And he says, I'm assigning these in your midst. We as part of the covenant, where you're naturally born into it as Yehud or adopted as a Goyim, it's very clear that Yahweh is offering his covenant children, his family, an inheritance. And he's loaded. I mean, Dad's loaded here. He's the entire universe. In fact, he's so loaded that this universe, he's going to say, it was just a fun thing that I did. But this next time, now that we're a family, we're going to do this next one together. Wow. You think the first one was good, but wait till you see this next one. That's what we're inheriting. Now, Dode gets the lion's share. Good for him. He also gets the lion's share of the responsibility. So, all fair. So the apportionment of that which is good and value could mean any one of or all 3 things. First, they will be receiving the benefits of the covenant. Second, they will be entering the millennial Shabbat, where we get to camp out with Yahweh for all time, and Yahweh is going to be inscribing his Torah inside of us. We'll share this next bit from Zechariah, and then this is actually a summation of where we have been in Zechariah, and then we'll pick up from this point next week.
14:2.
During that day, there will be a resource opened eliciting a response for the house of Dode, addressing a united Yisrael, and for the inhabitants of Jerusalem to reconcile, having been misdirected and wrong, and to purge detestable corruption. Zechariah 13:1. During that day, which is these are the days approaching Yahweh's return, there will be a resource open eliciting a response. If that's not Yada Yahweh, I don't know what it is. For whom? The house of Dode. A united Yisrael, for the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Why? Because we need to reconcile the fact that through religion and politics, you've been wrong, and that corruption needs to be purged. And it shall come to exist on that day, prophetically declares Yahweh of the spiritual implements, I will uproot and banish that which is associated with the names of the vexing, idolatrous images and displeasing objects of religious veneration from the land and earth, so that they are no longer recalled, proclaimed, or remembered ever again. There will be no Allah, there will be no Jesus, no Christ, no Shiva, no Lord, no Hashem, no Adonai. Just Yahweh. Moreover, those who claim to have been inspired such that they speak for God, among with the infamous and religiously defiling spirit, I will invalidate. I'm going to banish from the land and earth. This is not going to be a pleasant time for the religious. It shall come to pass that if anyone claims to speak as a prophet again, then his father and his mother will say to that child they conceived and bore, you shall not continue to live. For indeed, you speak lies, having testified falsely, betraying others for no reason, in the name, place, and reputation of Yahweh. This is what Adam should have said to Towrah. As a matter of fact, before Towrah was beguiled by Hasatan, he should have explained
instructed her
why those trees existed in the center of the garden. And he should have shared his relationship with Yahweh more openly. He should have communicated more completely with Towrah so that she could not have been misled, or at least treat her better so she didn't want to rebel, because it's very clear she envied Yahweh's role in Adam's life, and she wanted to be like God. She suffered from the same delusion as did Hasatan. But this is what parents should say to any child, because it is one thing to be deceived. It's another to deceive. Those who are deceived, those who are, for example, Haredim that have been played for fools by the rabbis, they are not going to Sheol. Their souls are simply going to dissipate into nothingness upon their mortal demise. Those who have done the deceiving, the rabbis, well, they're off to Sheol. And so what we're being told here is, as we enter the millennial celebration of Shabbat during Sukkah, free will will still exist, sex will still exist, children will be born. And those children will have the opportunity to choose Yah or not Yah. And while I expect it to be a very small percentage, that some will choose not Yah. And their parents will say, you're as good as dead. And will rebuke it before it grows and festers and swallows up many people. It shall come to pass that if anyone who claims to, this is the passage I just read, that to speak as a prophet, their mother and father will say, you will not continue to live. Then his father and mother, who conceived and bore him, will revile and pierce him, along with what he predicts. We have to be willing to speak out against that which is untrue. Those who are uncomfortable that I am exposing and condemning Christianity and Islam and Judaism, that is exactly what God wants us to do. These are people properly guided during the millennial Shabbat. They have the Torah written inside of them, and they're doing exactly what God wants. They're reviling it, they're piercing it, they're rebuking it. On that day, the individual claiming to be able to foretell the future and speak for God will know that it is wrong and will be too ashamed to share his revelation or dream through a prophecy. He will not play religious dress-up. Oh, boy, that'll leave a lot of people looking for something else to hang in their closet. Yep. In order to deceive, which is what religious dress-up does, while denying reality, becoming emaciated and cowardly, while others cringe. So he will say, and by the way, every bit of religious dress-up is just disgusting. From the skull cap to the weasel's hat, to the black mourning suit, to the stupid black box put on the forehead or on the arm.
And the wrist.
It is just disgusting. God hates it. Hates it with a passion. And so the only people you're fooling is one another. And in the process, irritating God and causing the rest of us to want to mock you. So he will say, I'm not a prophet. I am an individual who serves the realm of mankind. Indeed, from my youth, I have made merchandise of men. Boy, isn't that the rabbinic claim today? So if someone asks him, what is this plague? Why is there such affliction and loss of life? How is it that so many are impaired and slaughtered? What is the reason behind this devastating pandemic that you have influenced by making your connections between one thing and another, manipulating everything under your control? And he will say, regarding these associations and path through life, I was overwhelmed and stricken, possessed and controlled in the house of one who appreciates and desires me. Yes, they all love one another. Boy, they actually venerate dead rabbis as if they wrote the word of God. Celebrate their birth, celebrate their deaths. They just don't celebrate anything that Yahweh wants them to celebrate. You have chosen to blind by giving false testimony. We're talking about Jews living in the last days. Who do you think he's talking about if it isn't the religious? You have chosen to blind by giving false testimony, then gloated over your decision to be malicious, so that there is no hiding from the deceptions you have stirred up, chiseling away at Towrah, creating devastation and desolation through your inscriptions, in opposition to my shepherd, Dode, and against the empowered and strong man who serves as my associate, Dode. Prophetically declares Yahweh of the vast array of spiritual implements and heavenly messengers. When you choose to strike the shepherd, negating what the leader of the flock represents, then the sheep will be scattered and they will be attacked.
Wow.
So then,
helpful.
I will return using my hand to bring restoration on behalf of these little ones in the flock who have been trivialized. It shall come to exist in the entirety of the land, prophetically predicts Yahweh. The portion that 2/3 shall be cut off and eliminated, perishing, and 1/3 will be the remnant spared and preserved of them. I will come to and be included among this 1/3. In the fire, I will purge and refine them, perfecting them as one refines, purifies, and perfects silver, and tests them, observes, examines, and assesses them, testing and verifying their authenticity and genuineness, as one assesses the authenticity of gold. They will individually offer a summons and a welcome, calling out in my personal and proper name, and I myself will answer them. And I will say, each one is my family. Look up and pay attention. The day of return and inclusion is coming to approach Yahweh. And then that which is good and valuable, enriching and beneficial will be apportioned and assigned to you in your midst. They just don't write it like that anymore, do they?
No.
They just don't write it like that anymore. That is really, really profound. That is your sign, Yisrael. Was the comedian that says, wear this, that is your sign. That is your sign, Yisrael. That is your opportunity, Yisrael. Yahweh, the creator God of the universe, is returning to you.
God,
calling you family.
Embrace it. Embrace
it. Welcome him. Greet him. This is the most wonderful opportunity in the history of opportunities, the most extraordinary time in the long march of time. Capitalize on it. Invest the time to read these books, these translations of Yahweh's testimony. Yes, the commentary, the insights, the explanations. Come to know what Yahweh has said, what he's offering, what he expects in return. I dare say if you will invest the time to read An Introduction to God, the first 2 volumes, the first 6 volumes of Yada Yahweh, you'll fall in love. This is a love story. It's a story of great liberation, of freedom, of empowerment and enrichment. You'll gain the universe and lose nothing in the process. So please, open your mind, open your heart, take the time, read what God has to say. It'll transform your life. Well, that's the end of our time today, Kirk. It's always a pleasure.
Yes. Well, thank you.
I'm sorry the critic got under your skin. I just kind of laugh at it now. It doesn't.
It was an opportunity to think it through. It's always valuable.
Yeah.
Always valuable.
Yeah, and there is merit to this, and that this is Yahweh's witness. This is Yahweh's, as he would say, his nesh, his sign that he is lifting up. Mm-hmm. He is using us as his witness to his people to call them home. And so any attack on the credibility of Yahweh,
his sign,
as we are sharing it with you, that's serious stuff. And we want to make sure that you have what you need to be able to work your way through this material and know that they have nothing to offer you, which is why they're so intent on slander. Mm-hmm. They can't offer you God's name. They can't prepare you for this day where you'll welcome him into your life and proclaim his name. They can't teach you how to celebrate Pesach or Matzah B'Korim. Most certainly have no clue as to what happens and the reason for Shabbat or Towrah, Kippurim or Sukkah. They don't know Yahweh's timeline. They're screwed up on Maimonides' dates, which are sheer insanity. They've chosen to believe in the wrong men. They venerate the wrong source. And they do it for money. They do it for power. They do it for control. And so it's time that you sidestepped them, left them. And instead of getting embroiled in Israel politics, which is exceedingly sad these days, come to trust you.
Go it alone. Yeah.
You know, as you read about the foibles of Netanyahu and his negotiations during his plea deal, it's just heartbreaking. As you realize that Netanyahu's last vote in the Knesset was to block a bill that would have been the best thing that ever happened to the Haredim, to actually include them in the life of Israel as opposed to their own self-imposed exclusion in their ghetto of ignorance and uselessness. And the fact that without appeasing the ultra-Orthodox, there never would have been a Netanyahu government. And then you have Bennett forming an alliance with the very people that wish to kill every Jew and wipe Israel off the map. This is as dysfunctional as a country could be, a country without a constitution that has chosen to share power with the ultra-Orthodox religious so that the rabbis determine who is a Jew, not their ethnicity. The rabbis determine who can become an Israeli citizen, not one's desire or value or credibility as an individual or character. Who can marry, who can divorce, what you can eat, when you can eat. It's a very sad situation that exists in Israel because of the influence of the rabbis and how they have been appeased to form parliamentary coalitions. But these are the truth. This is a way for you to look at your world and to free yourself from their control, so that you have, perhaps for the first time in your life, the opportunity to know God as He really exists. His name is Yahweh, and we welcome you to Yada, Yahweh. May God bless. Good night.
Good night. Shalom.